Hi, I'm Stefania Brotini. Today I want to tell you about agonists and antagonists. Where are the receptors? Most receptors are an integral part of the cell membrane, so their activity depends on the integrity of the membrane itself. The interaction of the drug with the receptor depends on two parameters: the affinity and intrinsic activity of the drug compared to the receptor. And now the affinity. The affinity of the drug is a constant and represents the tendency to occupy the receptor. The affinity is the inverse of the dissociation constant of the drug. If we know the value of the affinity, we have the directions on the concentration of drug necessary to produce the effect. Decreasing the affinity, I have to increase the dose of the drug to obtain the same pharmacological response. The dose-response curve will be shifted to the right. And now the intrinsic activity. The intrinsic activity indicates the ability of a drug to interact with the receptor in an effective manner. In other words, it represents the ability starting the chain of events that leads to the evocation of the stimulus response effectors. And in the next slide, a receptor can exist in at least two conformational states: active state, inactive state. We have to imagine the whole thing as a continuous dynamic process. A drug with a higher affinity to the active conformation with respect to the inactive conformation shifts the equilibrium towards the active state and therefore activates the receptor. In this case, the drug is an agonist, but we can distinguish two types of agonist: full or pure and partial agonist. The drug is a full agonist when it is selective for the active conformation. The drug is a partial agonist when it has a slightly higher affinity to the active form, but also binds the inactive form. Its effect will be less, will have an intermediate effectiveness even at saturated concentrations. In reality, all agonists are partial, since the selectivity cannot be total. If a drug has an equal affinity for the active and inactive conformation, will not alter the balance receptor, which is defined as competitive antagonist. The antagonism can be classified as two types: competitive and non-competitive. The antagonism is competitive when two substances, A and B, have affinity for the same receptor and compete for the same receptor. The problem is surmountable. An increase in the concentration of A agonist occurs the displacement of the B antagonist by the receptor. So, a competitive antagonist shifts the dose-response curve of the agonist to the right. Furthermore, increasing the concentration on agonist, we can generate the same maximum effect obtained in the absence of the antagonist. A competitive antagonist reduces the power of the agonist. And in the next slide we can see that the antagonism is non-competitive in the case where a substance, without their interfering activity on the biological effect determined by the interaction air, the antagonist in this case is different from air, but is interdependent from air. Therefore, it has the impediment or the decrease of the interaction of A with R. The problem in this case is unsurmountable, since even increasing the dose of the agonist does not overcome the inhibiting effect of the non-competitive. The antagonism depresses the competitive effect maximum obtainable with high doses of the agonist without change the power. And so now I thanks for your attention, and now rest your mind. Bye bye, and see you tomorrow in the next